This is Mikey Mason, and you're listening to Why We Game.
I'm Brodor, and this is Why We Game. My guest returning this episode is Chad Wattler. Chad, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. I have a belly full of delicious Mediterranean food from a local restaurant named Catholic.
I was looking over the menu and I'm like, man, this looks good, but it's the lamb. I always get the lamb.
We DoorDash from Catholic pretty regularly, and I almost always get the lamb chops. And so today I thought I'm going to do something a little bit different. But Chad was, I should say U.S. Bank was so kind to buy us lunch. It was very kind of them. Yeah. A bank actually did something nice for us. It's actually very cool. If you don't know who Chad is a podcaster and a game designer and a long time OG host of Fear the Boot, a role-playing game podcast about tabletop games and a little bit more. And Chad is a pretty remarkable, fascinating guy. If you want to,
I am, aren't I?
You are very much so. In fact, if you want to hear how fascinating Chad is, you can tune into countless episodes of Fear the Boot, or you could go to Why We Game episode number 24. Yeah. Well, here we are, 12 episodes later. Chad is back, and we're actually going to talk about gaming this time, I think, or at least we're going to try to talk about gaming. Well, topics to avoid. We're not going to discuss excessive alcohol consumption or chemical dependency. Okay. We're not going to talk about KinderCare. We're not going to talk about Pedophile Island. We may cover bullying and physical, psychological abuse. That might just happen.
'Cause that's always fun.
We are definitely, though, going to talk about how you, as a game master, in particular, are someone who puts the bulk of the responsibility, or as I like to put it, the heavy lifting, on the actual players. And philosophically, you and I are very, very different because I am a dyed-in-the-wool, this is my role, that is your role. We are separated by the screen and by by my authority as in responsibility and sacred pledge and oath as the game master. And you should sit up and do as you're told. But you are very much, all right, kids, I built this playground. I hope you enjoy it or don't. Or if you want to take a hammer to the playground, that's cool. I'm not going to get butthurt about it. Have you always been hands off?
I have. When I first started role-playing, I was like, I am never going to run a game. So I have been gaming under Dan for, well, almost exclusively forever, right?
Right, since junior high.
Yeah. And Dan is very note heavy, right? You know, he has notebooks, he flips through them all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm like, man, that is a lot of work. And then I have to think of a whole, story and everything, and then I have to keep people engaged and interested. And so it's not just writing out your story, it is the engagement. It's the, okay, I'm this NPC, I'm talking to you, and then this person isn't paying attention because I am focused elsewhere. So now I got to bring them in, and I have to juggle all this stuff. It's like, man, that's not why I game. I game just to have some fun. I, hang out with my friends, tell a story, whatever. And I ran my first game as a one-shot. It was like a Call of Cthulhu game, and it's just like, well, I'll just give it a try, right? And it was all right. It was okay. But I never really got past that. Man, that is just oh, yeah, I can say fuck. I can say fuck.
You can say whatever you want.
Oh, wow.
In fact, in preparation for this interview, at 175 speed, I listened to the last episode because as a brodor, I am wont to be repetitive. And so I wanted to make sure that I avoided some of those subjects. But yes, you can say whatever the fuck you want on this show. And to repeat my joke, because I'm a brodor, I routinely say cunt. Excellent. So yeah, you do what you do, man.
So yeah, game mastering just always looked like a fuck of a lot of work to me.
Yeah.
Because not only do you have to engage, not only do you have to write the story, not only do you have to do all the notes, you also have to know the rules. And I think that was it was something that a lot of people do. To me, I don't think it's absolutely necessary for a game master to know the rules almost at all. And I think that pisses a lot of people off.
Well, yeah, because it is to the tradition of gaming. And I say that with tradition being, I don't know, maybe a dirty word, but within the tradition of gaming, that's anathema.
Yeah.
You don't do that because your responsibility as the game master, it's like the judge not knowing the law. And I realize how apt an analogy that is in defense of your argument.
Yeah.
Because
I'm not a judge.
Well, and the judge doesn't know the fucking law either.
Right.
The judge needs the attorneys to come to them and say, what was the precedent again? Because I'm an old codger who's been doing this for 4 years and I fucking don't remember and I just want to go be playing golf, leave me alone.
Yeah.
You guys tell me how it works and I'll make a decision. And so, okay.
Well, think of it this way. Like, what are the rules, really? I mean, they're about the characters. They're about a player and their character sheet and how their characters mechanically interact with the world. There's nothing for me as a game master.
No, the rules are 64 white and black squares and 16 white pieces and 16 black pieces on the other side. And you and Brent go sit us across from one another. And you're like, I'm sorry, Cracker. White goes first. Move your pawn, bitch. Let's do this. And because the rules are a battlefield that we both know and we both understand, and one of us is going to outthink the other and win the day.
But as a game master, you want your players to win.
I know.
So your role-playing is a horrible game for that concept.
I know, but the tradition of role-playing is heavily steeped in an adversarial. It's like our legal system. It is deliberately adversarial in its tradition.
Yeah.
And that tradition is wrong. I agree with you. I'm trying to recover, Chad. I'm trying to be woke. I'm still pretty sleepy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to wake up, right? Here's the thing. Most of the rules involve the player and their character and their character sheet. I don't need to know what your stats are. I don't even want to know what your stats are. When I have a combat, like I have a monster on the table, we're playing D&D, I have a monster on the table. You need to know the basics like, okay, initiative and 2 hit and that sort of thing. And the players have to understand don't even have to. I've played with players who don't understand their characters at all, and we've gotten along just fine. It just seems unnecessary. I just don't understand why in a rules-heavy game anyone really has to understand all of the rules.
Okay, does one person have to have an encyclopedic knowledge of all the rules? No. But as a group, we need to have, and why is it that you're on the show again and here we are, you're interviewing me? The thing is, the rules, they are there so we all have an understanding of what we can and cannot do.
So there's fairness.
And how things should be adjudicated, yes.
Except role-playing games aren't fair.
Well, no, because the game master does 90% of the game master does 90% of the work and gets 5% of the fun. Yeah, no, I understand it's not fair.
No, it's not fair because the game master cheats. Now, cheats is probably the wrong word for it, but think of it this way. You want your players to win. So you pull back on the encounter. Every single encounter you do. I mean, it's like, okay, you have a story where the group goes to the king and the king is an evil guy and they have to stop the king. And then they whip out their swords and they do heroic stuff and fight and vanquish the king. Okay, that's cheating because the king has an army. And there's no way 5 guys, no matter what their spell powers and magical stuff is, are going to go in and defeat the king. Because if your 5 guys have all this power, well, the king has 20 guys who has all that power too. So you pull it back. You pull it back to where it's a realistic and fun encounter. Now, you say that, well, we have to have rules so everything's fair for everybody, but it doesn't have to be fair for everybody because it is the story and the experience of what we are trying to do here. So when I run a combat like in D&D, I don't track hit points of the monsters. Now, I don't tell my players this. I have little scratch pads, and I kind of track how much general damage they're doing so that if I forget and I see, oh, they've beat up this guy for like 300 points of damage, he should be dead 10 times over, I'm just going to kill him. I don't track damage. I don't track damage because I don't care. I need this monster to die when I need him to die, not when the players do X, when they finish a math equation with random variables. Math equations with random variables, it's not a story. It's not engaging. It's not interesting. Now, it might be exciting and it might be fun, but for the overall experience, it's unnecessary. It's just a matter of giving the players a certain experience that they're looking for. They're being heroic. They're being challenged. They are using their abilities that they bought, spent points on and got. They are doing the things that they want their characters to do. And as a game master, I am not running the rules for them to do this. I am running the scenario that lets them do this. And now the difference between the two is that I don't have to bog myself down with rules and numbers and, well, maybe this happened or maybe that didn't happen. I have to give them that experience. So tracking experience points, tracking hit points, following the rules. Can this monster do this thing? Can't this monster, it can't do this thing? Is it weak against that? Is it strong against this? That really actually just is a distraction to me. It distracts me from telling this story of what is going on.
On some level, though, if your players know that those things don't matter and that it's arbitrary, does that adversely impact their fun?
100% yes. So I don't tell them that I'm doing this, but they know I'm doing it. Now, if you're gaming with me for the very first time and you don't know me, maybe you don't understand that. But I play with people I've been gaming with for a long, long time. And they know. It's just like watching television. It's like watching a movie. Arnold Schwarzenegger reaches into somebody's chest and pulls his heart out. Did he kill this person? Was Arnold Schwarzenegger, the actor, murdering a stuntman? No. Does that take away from your enjoyment of the movie? Absolutely not. Because you're there for the experience. You're not there for the medical drama of saying, if Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't really believe that he could shove his fist through a man's chest and pull his heart out, no matter how strong he is, and then the LAPD would put him up on murder charges. And no, it does. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter.
I understand where you're coming from, and I think that there's wisdom to the argument, but knowing that, Schwarzenegger didn't actually kill a guy, and knowing that the game master is going to pull their punch and not kill my character, even though I did something stupid and very likely deserve it, I think are two grossly different things.
Well, there's always consequence. There always should be consequence for action, whether it is positive or negative consequence. And when you start removing like just the algebra and the numbers from it, then you can start making those consequences more interesting. You can make them more story-based. You can make them, instead of just saying, well, you lose 5 hit points, you can start saying stuff like, you break your arm and the bone is sticking out, and you have to deal with that now. Now, and I'm sure arguments can be made. It's like, well, you can have that represented in D&D and stuff. It's like, absolutely, sure. There's lots of different ways of doing things like that. But I find that your character goes up to the captain of the guard and stabs him and does 5 points of damage, and the captain of the guard is like, ha, 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 and cleaves him for 5d6 points of great axe damage. And your consequence is that you have...
People are shitting themselves right now. Because first of all, they're like, Chad, it's a D12. Second of all, even if he crits, it's only 3d12. But depending on the version, I know.
And cleave is not for one person.
And I'm getting in the weeds. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and so, I mean, what's the consequence of that? The consequence is that you lose 20 hit points and you have 25. And you're like, oh no, my levels, my numbers are changing. And I'm not saying that isn't interesting and exciting and fun. I don't find that interesting, exciting, or fun. I find traditional combat in D&D, where it's hit points and we're rules and we're rolling and all that sort of stuff, and the numbers are the numbers and the rules are the rules, it's kicking each other in the shin.
Did you ever enjoy that? I think it's safe to make an argument that the hobby started out as that.
Yeah.
And in a lot of circles, the hobby still is that. Did you always have a distaste for the shin kicking, or is it something you grew out of?
So, when we started, it was pretty much raucous combat, shooting things, rolling dice, laughing. And I don't think I disliked it or anything like that. I mean, that's just what it was. But when we got into actual, this is kind of what my character is, well, I'm going to kind of do what my character would do. And you are too. And then we're kind of talking. I'm still talking teenage years, right? I'm not talking like high role play. We're playing a diceless game, and it is about we're sharing a soul to find our lost mother in a game where we use pennies, and it isn't like that. This was still really early on. It's not that I disliked the rolling the dice, the numbers, and all that sort of stuff. It's that what I disliked was you're sitting around a table with a whole bunch of people who are your friends, and you love them very much, and you're very outgoing, and you're very hyper, and we're all talking, and then it's combat, and then the game master is yelling at us to shut up because he can't hear what's going on. And him and another guy are rolling the dice. They are doing the math problem, right? Then it's the next guy's turn, and they're doing the math problem. And I'm sitting there waiting, looking over my stuff, preparing myself, interested in what's going on, waiting for my turn to do a math problem with my friend. And then that goes around the table like 5 times. And then we do that 2.5 more times for the session. And I'm like, no, I don't have a problem with the concept. I have a problem with that, with the waiting and waiting and waiting to do a math problem and then doing it over and over and over again. There's nothing exciting about that for me. The outcome's exciting. How we got there was exciting. On Fear the Boot, I described it, and I got a lot of hate for this, but I describe it as you're playing a video game it's a role-playing. It's like Final Fantasy, right? You're exploring, you're following a quest, you're going to a town, you're talking to people, you're learning the story, you're looking at a cutscene, you're going through and you're doing all of this stuff, and all of a sudden it stops. All of that stops. And it zooms in. And then you're making choices.
Final Fantasy Tactics.
Right.
So you're playing something in the same family of games, but it's mechanically completely different.
It just uses a different part of your brain. And the hate mail I got is like, oh, well, you can still role play during that. It's like, yes, obviously you can. It's like, okay, I stabbed this guy for 5 points. And like, no, I shiv him in the giblets and the blood squirts and he makes a face and I say, who killed my father? Yeah, you could do that sort of stuff. But again, you're just kind of overlaying a gloss on taking turns doing algebra. And it doesn't do anything for me. Let me tell you a story. All right. So this is
that's why you're here.
So this is a math story. This is a story where I get to toot my own horn, right? So I was a terrible student in school. Awful. I didn't do my homework, didn't pay attention. Later on, I just stopped showing up. Terrible student. Everyone thought I was stupid. My parents thought I was not that smart. And I never really showed an interest in math, and everyone thought I was terrible at math. So my mom's company has a picnic. Right, a sort of corporate picnic, go out to a park, and there's food and barbecue, and I'm a teenager, I go along with her, whatever. They have different contests and stuff, a raffle, whatnot. Well, one of the things they had was a guess how many jelly beans are in this jar. And you win the jar. It was like a pitcher, right? And you win the pitcher and you win the jelly beans. And apparently they hadn't gotten enough people kind of going for it. They just, I don't know why. So during lunch, they passed the jar around the table. It's like, oh, here, take a look. How many you got? How many you guess? Oh, I have this many. And then so everybody was doing it. The whole picnic did it. So it came around and it landed in front of me, and I'm looking at it, and they made 2 mistakes. First mistake is they let me touch it. Now, I didn't open it up or count. I didn't cheat. I didn't do anything like that. The second mistake is that they didn't use a round jar. They used a square one. So I'm looking at it.
And you could layer it.
I counted how many jelly beans were on the bottom, and then I counted how many jelly beans going up, and then I multiplied that, and then I added those numbers in how many rows there were. And there's a guy, I don't know, some coworker of my mom saw me doing it, and he's like, "Oh, you got it, didn't you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, there's this many jelly beans in there." It was like people were guessing 40 or 50. I don't remember how many there were. There's probably like 200 or something. I'm like, there are 263 jelly beans in here. Something like that. And he's like, "Oh, well, I guess I'll guess 262. All right." But, and again, everyone's at 300, 350, whatever. It goes all the way around. They're going through it. And they go up there and they're like, "Okay, and for the jelly bean thing, there were 262 jelly beans." And this guy looks at me. And the right answer was Chad Wattler, Noreen Wattler's son, with 262. And the whole place went silent, and I got up, and I'm like, boop, 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 boop. "Thank you very much." Boop, boop, boop. Everyone's looking at me, and they're giving me this, like, did his mom just tell him how many were in there? And I sat down, my mom's like, "I thought you hated math." I'm like, I hate math, but that doesn't mean I'm bad at it.
It's the language of the universe. How could you hate it?
Because it's boring. I mean, that's all there is to it. I don't have a problem with math at all. Math is great. Math is incredibly useful. And I'm not terrible at it. I just don't have an interest in it. And for me, there are 2 sides to a role-playing game. There is a side that is a world, and it's a story, and it's characters and how they're interacting with this world, how they're influencing it. It's the game master making a framework. Is a framework of reality. So we have magic and giant monsters and all this sort of crazy stuff. We have spaceships and we have laser beams. We have all this crazy stuff. And the game master makes a framework of reality around this unreality. That is actually the part that really interests me as a game master, is making this framework of reality. You have a second part, though, that is the simulation. If we go in the first part and you tell me my character punches this guard, we can think of that. We can think of that in concepts. We can think of like, okay, the guard's bigger, you're smaller, you punched him, but you're mean, you know how to fight, you surprise him, man, you just deck him. That would go really great in the story. Or maybe the game master is like, well, these guys have had too many wins, punches them, and the guy, he knows he's coming, he catches your hand and he glares at you and stuff. That's a story, there's narrative, there's things going on there.
But he's armor class 18, and I caught him flat-footed.
Now we go to the other side. We go to the other side, which there is nothing wrong. I'm not arguing against the math side.
Oh, no, there's a lot wrong with it. There's a lot wrong with it, but I love it.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with loving it.
It's like my marriage.
I'm not getting into that. The math side of it is the logical, fair, mathematical representation of how the universe works, which is what math is. Math is our interpretation of how the universe works that's beyond an interpretation. 1 + 1 is 2. It's not an interpretation, but it is how we can understand how the universe works through math. Everything is math. And it's great. But it is also, in my opinion, it's detached. It's logical. It does not give you a narrative. And people will argue, rightly so, that the rules in a role-playing game provide this random element that crosses over into this other half, into this framework, this story and this narrative, right? It creates a bit of chaos that puts a spin on this framework that you and the players have made. It creates elements that you did not foresee, and then you have to react to that, and that is interesting. And I 100% admit and agree with that. It does make that random element that puts the spin on the world that does make it interesting, and I don't think it's necessary. I think that framework, that other side, has that anyway. You have a game master who generally knows everything that's going on, at least enough of what's going on to make this framework and to make it seem like the whole world is working. The players know what their characters are doing. The game master can't read their mind. So if you unload a lot of the work to the players, you let them create parts of the world. You let them have NPCs. See, I gotta even catch myself. I hate that term. You let them have NPCs. You let them have part of the world. That isn't a permission that the game master should or shouldn't be giving. It is our story. I don't let them have NPCs. They have good characters. They make good characters. Good characters are an integral major part of the world. Or not, and even if they're not, that is part of the story. They're creating people. They're creating individuals, and individuals have social connections. It isn't up to me to let them have NPCs in my game. It is our story. So for me to even say, I allow them to make deep character, I allow them to have all these NPCs, I allow them to make major changes in my world, that isn't even how I game master. I think that's ridiculous. But getting back to it, though, I think that with the chaos, with the spin, with the random element that makes the world more real, which makes this framework more real, you get that from the intersection of what all the players are doing, and that we're not this Gestalt consciousness, and that we know what the ending is going to be, and we know what all the players are trying to do and what's going to happen. We don't know. How many times have your players thrown you for a loop? How many times have they said and done things in your very controlled game? Have your players...
It's constant.
It is. Yeah. And it's wonderful.
It is. It's enjoyable sometimes.
But again, I don't disagree with the concept that the math, the algebra problem that the rules present, put that chaotic spin on things. My problem with that statement is not that it's true. It is absolutely true, and it is good. My problem with the statement is that math is a horrible storyteller. Math does not fail when it is dramatically appropriate to fail. Math fails, or has a character fail, a hit roll or whatever, seemingly at random, which is the point of it, right? You know, it's like, that's why you roll the dice. That's why the numbers of the dice go through the mechanism of the algebra problem to give you the result. That's why the rules have your characters build things which are variables, unknown variables, that give them modifiers to edge that number in a way they wish it to go, to give them a better chance that the engine puts out the response that they want. That has nothing to do with telling a good story, though.
But as an audience member, if I'm watching the aforementioned Schwarzenegger movie, I know that it's just a movie. And I'm very confident that, you know, through the course of Acts 1, 2, and 3, the movie's going to be fairly predictable. It might throw a couple curves at me, but for the most part, it's not going to. In a role-playing game, however, as the participatory audience, right, as the player, I don't have those same assumptions about the role-playing game experience, right? And I can't know how the game master does the magic trick. Like I go and I see Penn and Teller, right? And I know it is all trickery and subterfuge and illusion. But for that hour and a half, whatever, I just want to believe in the magic, right? Yeah. And I can't know in that moment as a PC, as an audience member, and as a fellow writer of the show, I can't know that stunt person is just a stunt person. Right. And I can't know that you fudged the dice because then it feels worse than arbitrary. Yeah. It feels scripted, and I can't have that.
It's actually worse than feeling scripted. At least with scripted, you're getting a story out of it. It is taking away victory, or it is making accomplishment meaningless.
It's hollow, yeah.
Yeah. So here's my counter to that. One, you're absolutely right. And when I run a game, I do it. I fudge, I cheat, I don't track, I do all this stuff. I'm telling a story. My players understand this, and I think that there's a tacit sort of, we're not dealing with that. We're just going with it. But I don't flout it, right? I'm not sitting there going, oh, well, the numbers don't matter, and the points are made up, and whatever that,
Yeah, whose line is it anyway? Yeah.
Thing. But you cannot take victory away from them. But isn't that what the math does? Because think of it this way. It is a random engine where you want an achievement out of it. You have spent points, you have done role-playing, you have done effort, and then when you roll the dice come up a failure, the engine pops out, no, you failed. Isn't that unfair? It isn't the game master taking that success away from you. It is the universe taking that success away from you. And it feels shitty.
It does. And so, and again, we're going to get super into the weeds because I would say my role-playing philosophy, and it is not originally mine, right? There are many permutations of this idea. But if failure isn't interesting, don't pick up the dice.
If failure isn't interesting, don't tell a story.
Well, now, I mean, okay, I get where you're coming from, but I want to be a hero. I want to win, but I don't want it to be easy, and I don't want to always win.
The Twilight Zone episode where the guy goes to hell.
Yeah.
To me, that right there, Rod Sterling, genius, by the way, that episode is the epitome of role-playing games, of the concept of what it means to have good and bad role-playing. The lesson of that episode. Because the guy gets everything he wants. He wins, and then he gets so sick of it, he's like, hey, can I go to the other place? Can I go to hell? Because you just cannot be interesting. You might as well sit on a stump and do nothing. And the guy was like, no, you're already here. And to me, that's what a role-playing game is, where the dice are great in that regard. Because they hand you failures no matter what you do. As a game master who...
Wait. I want to chew on that for a minute.
Yeah.
Say that again.
The dice are great because they hand you failure no matter what you do, I think is what I said.
Yeah. The dice are great because they hand you failure. And as you have said more than once on your very popular role-playing game, RPG podcast, Fear the Boot, failure is interesting.
Absolutely. Failure is interesting. Failure is the core of a good story, because a boring story is you walk outside to get your mail and it's a beautiful day and you have no bills in your mailbox and you come and you walk inside. Is a boring story. And even that story has conflict in it because there's an implication. There's an implication that you have bills and you don't like them. So conflict, failure, tension is the meat of every story. Failure is it's not the only part, but is a big part of that. Dice give you that, and it's lazy.
Now see, here's where, okay. I think that the dice are a tool.
Absolutely.
And if you forgive me a minute, I'm gonna step all over the guest.
It's my fetish.
I think that the dice are a necessary tool, but I don't think that every problem is a nail, right?
Right.
And I must admit that I'm that game master too. And I think that the game master screen in particular, because it puts a barrier between the two of us, it is a demarcation between your responsibility as a participant and my responsibility. And let's set my hang-ups aside on that for just a moment. Behind the screen, I can do things like I did in a very recent combat encounter in my D&D game, right? We're doing Midnight. It's 3.5, and Midnight has a special sort of ambush rule that you can get for stealth, right? Special abilities you can do, and they're gonna fuck the NPCs, right? Like this combat encounter is gonna be boring as shit for them because they're gonna win it so easily. So I just made a decision on the NPC, and I had the pre-written NPCs from the back of the rule book and whatever, and I was like, did I say that she was a 5th level cleric? because she's an 8th level NPC, cleric 4, fighter 4. So now she's got all these hit points and combat abilities, and she's going to survive the first round of the ambush. And it's going to be exciting and fun, and she's going to kick ass.
Yeah.
And the PCs will still get their victory, but it won't be the cakewalk that they thought it was going to be, right? So still very, very one-handed, but she almost kills 2 of the NPCs. Doesn't kill anybody, almost kills 2 of the NPCs. And this is from not lying from die rolls, right? But where I will lie about die rolls is I'll tell you that I missed when I didn't. I'll tell you that I failed to save when I didn't. I'm not the kind of game master that is going to steal victory from you. However, I will feed you victory in the game. I will cheat because it is a more exciting thing. Yeah. Had they spent 1.5 rounds of ambush encounter and the bad guys never went, why did we bother putting figures on the table?
That wasted time.
It was dumb. You're an idiot, Mike. Why did you waste your goddamn time? But by adapting and understanding how the players worked, by being able to see how the encounter and how the math and the numbers are gonna work before we ever pick up the random number generator, I was able to adjust on the fly and make a good encounter. And I had to tell you, I think that the math helped me do that. Now,
absolutely.
To your, God, my wife hates it when people say to your point. It's like irregardless. Sometimes I do it because I'm a prick.
Yeah.
Speaking of marriage,
110%.
There's a wonderful comedy special on Netflix you should watch. Now you're getting the tangential face.
Okay.
Whenever you're irritated with me, you have a specific face, but you also have tangent face.
So my thought process is story. Okay. So there's a TV show. I don't watch TV. On Netflix, I don't have Netflix.
Okay. There's a comedian.
I'm not going to say that.
There is a comedian named Reese Nicholson who made a wonderful joke about divorce, right? His husband comes to him and is like, da-da-da-da-da-da, and they're getting a fight. Oh, you'd like to get divorced? Here are 12 forms. And then his husband balks and he's like, I see. What would you like for dinner? And my wife and I both looked at each other and fucking died because it was so real life. Right? Like, there's 12 forms. I don't want to get a divorce. There are forms. But any which way, I like the math because the math is a crutch to me now.
Absolutely.
Running that same game, all my papers, all my notes, all my production, everything that my players see, only fucking number that ever mattered didn't matter at all, because all that mattered is that NPC went down at the moment that it felt right with the momentum for that NPC to go down. Yep. And so I recognize that I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth.
So did you fudge his hit points?
No, I literally just changed. I literally changed gears. I'm literally looking at a piece of paper that I have that has 4 different types of enemy cleric on it, and I was on stat matrix B, and I just moved to stat matrix D, and I was like, well, fuck it. I mean, she's not going to die on round 1. I know that. You know, my buddy Banker, his character almost died, and, you know, my wife, the chef, her character took a fuck ton of hit points, went from 0 to 60 in 2 attacks, and my wife was like, fuck, respect, lady. This bitch can fight. And then my wife's character put her down. Like a dog. But my wife loves to fight, man. Yeah. She loves combat. She loves that shit.
Yeah. And I don't mean to like put combat and rules and numbers down. You're right.
You have not. Yeah. You've just said, this is not my jam. And then gamers who are super sensitive and easily butthurt think, Chad doesn't like what I like, ergo he's hurt my feelings because he's insulting me. No, that's not what you did.
Yeah. The game aspect of it, the problem, do I move here? Do I use this ability? What is the consequence of doing this? That sort of logical problem is very intriguing. It's very cool. And then you combine it with something else you like, which is, again, the framework of reality, the story, the narrative. So not only is it moving here and doing this, when you get into like a high level of role play and you get into that numerical combat, it's like the thing I should do according to the equation that we're doing is I need to attack this monster, which will cause this effect, which will enhance us and win, basically. But my character on the other side, in the reality, is like this. And he saw his buddy go down and thinks he's dead. So what my character would do is actually run over, lift up his shield to shield his buddy, and make sure he's alive. And oh my God, I hope he's not dead. When you combine those two things, that is what really gets the engine running for a lot of people. I think that's a lot of where the magic is.
Sure, because in that scenario, the combat encounter isn't the game. And for me, dude, I get off on the combat encounter. Mm-hmm. I love fights. I love describing fights. I love games that have fights. I love games that don't have fights. So there's games that don't have heavy rules for fighting, so that we can get all gonzo and have like Blades in the Dark.
Blades in the Dark, shoot a guy in the dick with a grapple gun.
Yeah, we can have, you crush a guy's scrotum with your grapple gun. That shit's fun. I like that sort of thing. However, the encounter, and people have criticized me on Fear the Boot for this, that D&D is the wrong game for me because I don't fight enough.
Yeah.
But I need a reason to fight. I need the fight is a tool, just like the combat's a tool in anything else. It's a means to a narrative end.
Yeah.
Right? I don't, and I think that there are a lot of people who play these games that if you are not doing the combat encounter optimally, if you're not making the correct decision mechanically, then you're not playing the game right. And that's not the kind of fight that I want either.
I get them too. I get the logical progression, right? So we're playing D&D. We're playing a very rules heavy version of D&D or whatever. I have spent time crafting the character. I made his backstory, all that sort of stuff. But we're not playing first level nobodies. We're playing 10th level. So I have like abilities I have to take.
Yeah, you're kind of a stud. 10th level, you're kind of a stud, but you're not broken yet. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'm trying to make this character work that is in line with what idea of the character that I have, but also has all these abilities and all these buttons I can push and all that sort of stuff. So I do that work, right? And then we start playing the game and we never, ever, ever have a combat. Like, okay, pick up dice to bluff. And then the logic is there. If we are not going to use what is on this sheet, why did I do the work? The logical step after that is, if I did all of the work and we are using everything on the sheet, why are we hobbling ourselves? Why not do that math equation and build that engine to be optimal, to really ping off of each other? Why don't we play the game great instead of doing a compromise between the two where, well, my character's like this, so I took like this horseback riding feat, even though we're in the Underdark, we're never going to ride on a horse, and no, you can't take it because you could put this other thing in I get the logical flow of it. I don't agree with it. It is tiresome. It's a tiresome argument, but that is because of the two halves of a role-playing game, the numbers stuff is not the priority for me.
No, I get that. And this is going to sound strange to people, but it's not a priority to me either, but I dig it.
Right.
I mean, I do enjoy a game that has a combat mechanic to it. It is a separate thing. I can't argue with that. It's as if we're playing two different games because one, we're telling a story, and the other, we're using a series of complicated mathematics and mechanics to simulate a fight between monsters and magic that don't exist.
Now they bleed into each other, but that's all they do.
You're absolutely right.
Best.
So then and God, it's a long way to answer this question, but then that's how gaming started for pretty much everybody in our age group. Did you always know that that's not what you wanted?
So here's the thing. I had a gaming group and I never game mastered. I game mastered like one session once and I'm like, ew, I don't like this. And I only played, I don't know if this is going to make sense or not. because my identity that I made for myself as a person was someone who only played. It's kind of a silly identity to have.
No, I get it.
It's definitely not something I wear on a shirt or put on a job resume. But at the time, that's kind of like how I identified myself as a role-playing gamer, is I just play.
And maybe I'm fabricating this, but culturally, when I was younger, I remember it was almost like you had gamers and you had people that were players and you had people that were game masters, and that being a game master was like this secret esoteric thing that you had to be read into.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, you just didn't become a game master, right? It's almost like your parents had to move to a new town and you could just tell everyone that, oh yeah, in my last town I was game master.
Younger folks might not even understand this, but like imagine you did move into a new town and you went to the hobby shop and you found a group. In your old town, you were the game master. You game mastered everything. But you found a new group, and Greg is the game master. And you kind of float the idea, hey, I used to run games. I can run a game. And everyone will look at you like you had a third eye growing out of your forehead. Yeah,
now people are falling over themselves, right? But back then, you couldn't, if you wanted to DM.
Right. You might as well start a new group.
Yeah.
And that would probably be how you'd be looked at. It's like, oh, well, Greg's the game master. You know, I could run a few games. No, Greg is the game master. By the way, we have been running this game for 35 years. Same characters, you know. That's how it used to be, and thank God it's not like that anymore. But my kind of journey was that I had a falling out with Dan. And I don't want to get into the nitty-gritties of it. It was just some stupid shit.
No, you're both difficult people. I get it.
Absolutely. Well, people talk about us like we're married because we are. We're hetero life mates.
No, you guys, there is a dynamic with people who have been friends for very, very long, where to the outside observer, sometimes you're like, do you guys even like each other? Like, what the actual fuck? But no, I have the same relationship with my buddy Anthony, so I get it.
Yeah. We hit a point in our early 20s where we were sick the shit of each other, I think. And I don't think either of us would have said it like that back then. But yeah, I mean, basically we had a falling out over something stupid and we didn't want to see each other again and we hated each other. Well, probably not each other. But anyway, we didn't want to see each other again. He was the game master, right? I was the player, and there was a friendship divorce, right? I don't know if you've ever been through a friendship divorce.
I have not, but I assume that you guys have to split the friend group, right?
Yes.
Is it like a draft, or do the attorneys figure it out?
It's how I went through a friendship divorce was, fuck it, I am not going to play this game. Like, I don't even want to do this, right? Like, this is stupid. So Dan got all the friends. Not a slam against Dan or anything like that. Again, this was stupid early 20s bullshit drama. But anyway, he got all the friends, so he got the gaming group. And I got myself and Dawn. And so we made new friends. We encountered people I worked with and encountered some other people, and a group coalesced, a group of friends coalesced who had similar interests. And I was a little bit older. Dawn and I were both a little bit older than these other people, not much, but a little bit. And they were kind of nerds, but none of them had been into gaming. And we were like, have you guys ever been to a hobby shop before? Have you guys ever heard of a role-playing game? And they're like, no. Is that like Star Trek? No. And so we pitched this idea of playing a role-playing game. Well, Dawn is not a gregarious person. She's not outgoing. That's my job in the relationship. So I am. And none of these other people had ever played a role-playing game before. So none of them were going to run the game. Dawn wasn't going to run the game, even though she's a phenomenally good game master. She has run very few games, and the games she has run have been outstanding. So it was on me to run the game. And that's how I got into game mastering. It was either run a game or don't game anymore. And so, okay, let's do it. Went in, and what was the version of D&D that had the guy on the horse with the winged helmet coming at you, and he had a sword and stuff? Whatever version that was.
It sounds like a second edition AD&D cover, if I'm thinking of the right cover.
I can count. Third.
Might have been third?
Yeah, because it didn't have
It didn't have THAC0?
Yeah, it didn't have THAC0. It didn't have
then it definitely wasn't. Okay, so it was probably third edition, and especially if it was 2000s era.
Yeah, so that had just come out, like that week. It had just come out. That was the week we walk into the fantasy shop on Gravois, I think it was. And we walk in and we're like, okay, guys, I've played all these role-playing games, but I've never game mastered anything. You guys don't even know. Let's look around. What do we got? Well, big fucking display of D&D. I mean, they had a shipper. They had everything. They had all that. And we're just like, well, hell, we've heard of D&D before. I've played D&D. Wow, look at this artwork. Full page, full color art. It isn't blueprint, so you can't prevent you from
Well, no, they actually had print designers, and they made games that, didn't look like they were, some late 60s technical manual.
I got a guy who knows how to draw. He made this tattoo for me. It's like, dude, that tattoo's awesome. It's Eddie Van Halen riding a Pegasus. Let's get your dude in and do this game.
It's so true. So then you just had to become the game master when you're playing D&D, right?
Yeah. So,
but then that's a game that is, hey, Chad, here's everything on your character sheet is about fighting,
right? And
it's not what you want to do.
And so I cracked the book open and I'm like, oh God, this is so boring. I'll look at the rules later, toss it aside, basically construct a game. I had 3, 4, 5, 6 players. So it was a seven person group. So it was pretty chaotic anyway. If you've played a role-playing game before and you don't read the rules to D&D, you can kind of basically get it. It's like handing a person a cell phone who doesn't use a computer. They can kind of figure it out. They can kind of figure out how to open things and make a phone call. And that's same thing with D&D is, well, I knew it involved a D20 and I knew bigger numbers were better. Like you had to roll high. And, I knew what an armor class was, knew what hit points were. Basically, if you knew how to do initiative, you knew how to do a 2-hit, and you knew how to roll damage, that's 90% of what you need to know. And in that edition of D&D that had just come out, they had, the last 5 pages were a monster manual. So it had, skeletons and stuff. And so I just used those stats.
Right, because the player's handbook came out, but the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual didn't come out until later.
Yep.
No, I very distinctly remember that.
They fought so many skeletons that weren't skeletons. Because I knew the skeletons were weak, I knew that they could beat them, and I just said, okay, a werewolf attacks you. And it just so happens to have all the same stats I need to roll against as a skeleton because it's a skeleton. And I just told them it's a werewolf. And we played, and I did terrible things. I made a lot of mistakes. I had players frustrated with me, and we loved it. They had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. We had good games. We had bad games. We had games where we just didn't feel like it, and we just went bowling instead. We were young, college-age students, and we had very little money and a whole lot of time on our hands.
Do you have a system that you gravitate toward? Is there something that if you're looking at your game shelves and if you have to weigh them, this is my number one, this is my thing, or this is the type of game at least that I prefer to do. Do you have something like that?
No, I don't. I think because if I had a type of game, if there was something I wanted to do that was not published, right? Like I just can't, let's say there's just D&D and there's Vampire the Masquerade, and those are the only 2 role-playing games that exist. So you either run that kind of game or that kind of game, and that's it. I would just make something up, I think. For me, when I play a role-playing game back in the day, it was D&D. And if you didn't want to play D&D, maybe we played Battletech. And then we kind of half-assed those rules, too. There's a lot of half-assing of rules back in the day. But, there's no one game that I consider like my game. There's games that I avoid because I don't like the story and the setting, and I don't like the rules. Shadowrun is an example of that. I really hate Shadowrun because
you refuse to say it as one word. Is that why?
Shadowrun.
No, you do Shadowrun.
Shadowrun.
Yeah, well, they're close. Yeah. They're almost, it's hyphenated.
Well, because you're a runner. You're doing a run.
Yeah,
We stopped them doing a run, and it's like,
I mean, Shadowrun is a just cumbersome pig, but I love it.
So what I will say about Shadowrun is that the rules are awful, and they haven't gotten better. They've just gotten less awful over the years, and that's not a compliment.
That's hardcore. But I mean, the
setting though.
I love the setting.
The lore is just layered and layered, and there's a ton of it. And that was the thing about those old FASA games, is that in other role-playing games, it seems like the lore is in service to the rules in the game. Whereas in the FASA stuff, you have lore books that don't have any mechanics in them whatsoever. It's just like, here's a setting. Shadowrun, here's a city book. Maybe there's a couple of archetypes, gun and a spell or two, but it is just about this city and what's going on. And I always thought that was neat. That was really cool. I just didn't like the story they were telling. Back in the day when we were playing Shadowrun, when Shadowrun had come out, I was a huge sci-fi fan. It's like, there are people, I only read fantasy, I only read sci-fi. This is a very sort of 80s, 90s thing.
Oh, no, for sure, because I'm a fantasy guy.
Right. I didn't really read fantasy. I've read a handful of fantasy books. I was a science fiction guy. I had also read Cyberpunk, and Cyberpunk is actually a series of books, and I had read every book in the series. And I had read other books within the genre of Cyberpunk as well. So I loved Cyberpunk. It was my preferred genre within science fiction. And then I read like Shadowrun, and I'm like, is Cyberpunk not cool enough for these guys? Like, Cyberpunk is so lame. The only way we can, whore it up a bit is by adding elves. And I had just come from like D&D, where it was that sort of Tolkien second ed D&D thing, where all of these fantasy and all the convention and stuff, all these fantasy people are like, elves are just better. Their food is, like, look at Lord of the Rings. Their food is better. They fight better. They live longer. Their clothes are better. Their boats are better. Everything is better about an elf. It's just better. The elves are just better. And then so I get into Shadowrun, and it's just like, oh, well, hey, it's Cyberpunk with magic. That's cool. And I'm reading, it's like, it's just Cyberpunk wasn't cool enough for these people, so they had to add in fantasy. No, you're being lazy. You can write a good fantasy, and it's not and you can write a good Cyberpunk, but actually they couldn't write either, so they wrote lazy fantasy and lazy Cyberpunk. And then now it's good, because...
I'm going to counterpoint. When I was in high school, Shadowrun, my buddy Adam Clark, who, swear to Christ, has the exact same tattoo in the exact same spot.
Right.
We went together.
It's a tattoo of your butt on your butt.
It is a tattoo of a broken heart from Scud, the Disposable Assassin. Shadowrun is the reason why I survived high school.
Sure.
I fucking love it, because Shadowrun had everything for me that a growing 14-year-old boy gamer wants. Yeah. And it's got guns and grenades and fireballs and dragons and trolls with fully automatic Gatling guns that have a cycle rate of like 5,000 rounds per minute.
It's got guys who can play keyboards.
Panther cannons.
It's got, which is very 80s.
It said if there is some dumb shit that you would get up at watch at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, we're going to put that in your game. Oh, and by the way, we're going to advance technology, and the whole world is run by corporations.
Right.
It was beautiful and prophetic.
Yeah. I just don't like it.
I know, I get you. I hear you. There are things that you just don't dig. I don't dig My Little Pony. I don't fucking get it. It's not for me.
Right. It shouldn't be for you. It's a little kid show.
I don't think that that's true, Chad. I have seen 2 documentaries about bronies that would counterpoint that it is not for children, and that it is very calculated and geared toward adult men.
In a very sexual way.
Well, this isn't for the boot, Chad, so you can say whatever it is that you want to say.
I will say, because we're on tangent mode, I will say I actually love My Little Pony. I'm not a brony. I don't watch it. I haven't watched it in years. When my son was born, when he was, I forget what age, a very, very young little boy, was when My Little Pony came out, right? And my son was afraid of lightning, thunder. You know, crack, and it's like, oh shit.
Right,
sort of
like
thing.
my dog, yeah.
Yeah, and that's how little he was. I mean, like little kid, right? Little kid.
Yeah, I did not mean that to be disparaging for the people that took it that way.
No. So he was afraid of lightning, right? And we watched Transformers. We watched the little kid Transformers, and he loved Transformers. He watched the old one and the newer ones and stuff. The little kid one was funny and stuff. And he watched other stuff, and he watched My Little Pony. And I watched some of the stuff with him, and I watched My Little Pony with him. Well, there are two things about My Little Pony. One is that they actually have a consistent plot line to it, which is not how they used to do cartoons back in our day. They were just toy commercials. They're still toy commercials, but there's a plot line to it, so I give it respect.
Yeah, they're not shamelessly in propaganda for purchasing toys.
Yeah.
Right.
I give it some respect because it had an ongoing plot line. And same thing with the Transformers, new Transformers ones too, even the ones for little kids and stuff. And one day, they had an episode where one of the characters, I forget which one, I think it was the one with the rainbow sporty spice or whatever the one was, and who was afraid of lightning, who was afraid of thunder, and how she came over it. And it wasn't a magic feather like in Dumbo, and it wasn't like some convoluted thing. It was her friends are in trouble, and she had to step up during a thunderstorm and face her fears. And Sky looks at me at the end of it, and he's like, if such and such little pony isn't afraid of thunder, then I won't be afraid of thunder. And I'm like, I love this show. This is the greatest cartoon on the face of the planet. I don't give a shit what anybody says or what anyone thinks of me. That cartoon made my son not afraid of thunder and lightning. Boom, win. That's all there is to it.
It takes maturity to not yuck other people's yum.
Right.
And I have not discovered maturity until my middle age. No, I'm quite serious. I'm a late bloomer, right? I've always been a late bloomer. At 46, I feel like how most of my friends probably felt at 30, maturity-wise. And I'm not saying that, again, to denigrate myself. It takes me, it's like one of my favorite Rush lyrics. I can do what you do. It just takes me longer.
Yeah.
Well, Chad Wattler, it has been an absolute pleasure. In 12 more episodes, when I come to episode 48, I'm just going to have Chad Wattler on every dozen episodes to catch up. Well, Chad, thank you so much.
Did we hit all your points?
Oh, well, no. So actually, here's what I did. Yeah. I have my little notes here. It really wasn't a matter of hitting points. It was things to avoid because I didn't want to be repetitive, but fuck, we could do another hour just on why online gaming sucks.
Oh my God. It sucks.
It does. It's the worst. Oh my God, for the love of Christ. But you know what? Let's save that to next time. Chad Wattler, again, where do we find your works? It's Morning Skies?
Morningsky.com.
Morning Sky.
SKYE. Morningsky.com.
Morningsky.com. Well, Chad Wattler of Fear the Boot fame and game design fame, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
Why We Game is a production of the Influence Foundation. All rights reserved. Audio editing by Brodor. Music by Owen Godwin.